Hello and welcome to another episode of Hollywood Wargaming, and today we're going to be putting out another bolt action video. I know it's been a while for you guys. I've been doing a lot of Star Wars Legion stuff, and I haven't been able to put out quite as much content in general, but I absolutely do not plan on leaving you guys in the dust. This is still one of my favorite miniature war games, and I still am cranking out bolt action models on a 2-to-1 ratio compared to my Star Wars Legion models. So I figured I'd take advantage of this brief gap of free time that I have and throw out a little video for you guys that I've been thinking about for a while, and that is the topic of Faust vs Schreck in bolt action. And these are two very popular weapons, and almost every German player, as long as you're in that late war area, will be collecting and fielding these in your army. And as an Africa Corps player, I will admit that I am sorely envious of the many players who more commonly take that late war route. And that is because they are both quite good tools to have in your arsenal when you're building a list. However, I believe that most veteran bolt action players are going to go ahead and pick one very much so over the other, and maybe even declare it as one of the best upgrades you can throw on your infantry in the game, and one of the most attractive feats of the German faction in bolt action, which can honestly even be exploited by some of the other factions. So, as a bolt action player, should you buy and collect and paint a Panzer Schreck or Panzer Faust? Which one should you field in your list routinely? And more importantly, which one is the better anti-tank option? And of course, to do this, we are going to have to take a look at their stats. And they are both very similar, as they are both the prototype RPG that the Germans fielded in World War II. Although it is definitely worth noting that the Panzer Schreck was conceived after the Germans captured an American bazooka. But history aside, both of these weapons are going to be shaped charge weapons, which means they do not suffer the -1 penetration modifier when fired at long range. And that really is a very useful keyword to have, as these weapons do not have the longest range, and will suffer dramatically otherwise when firing them from long range. However, it is worth making note that this does not mean that they do not suffer the -1 to hit at long range. I've seen a lot of players make that confusion, including myself on the tabletop. It is not suffering the -1 penetration. They still suffer -1 to hit, which is very unfortunate, because as we all know with Math Hammer, the more upfront your statistical advantages are, the more it will pay off down the pipeline. So, much like armor saves in Warhammer, having a weapon that has better chances to hit might be better at knocking out vehicles than a weapon that has a higher penetration value, as you do need to worry about hitting first. Still, negating that penetration drop-off is very welcome, and something that doesn't always apply to anti-tank weapons, so it's definitely by no means a drawback. After that, we're going to see that the Panzer Faust and Panzer Schreck both have a penetration value of +6, which is very, very high. In fact, that is equivalent to a heavy anti-tank gun, which is a relatively uncommon weapon in bolt action. So when you combine that shape charge with that penetration value and put it on a infantry-based platform, the appeal of these weapons becomes very obvious. Aside from the Japanese and a few niche units scattered about other factions, you're not really going to find that amount of punch packed into an infantry unit in bolt action. And that will be doing superficial damage to a medium tank on a roll of 3+, penetrating on a roll of 4+, and over-penetrating on a roll of 6. So as long as you do line up and land your hits properly, there is a very good chance that you're going to be able to put vehicles out of action with these weapons, even if it is just for another turn. But as we all know, in bolt action, a medium tank is a very costly piece of equipment, and putting it out of action for a turn is going to greatly put a dent in your opponent's army efficiency. So both the Panzer Faust and Schreck are weapons that will be feared by a knowledgeable opponent, and if your opponent is foolish enough to stumble into your trap with them, they will likely be losing armor. But with their base stats aside, let's go ahead and take a look at what makes these weapons different. So we're going to start with the Panzer Schreck. And the Panzer Schreck is going to be fielded in your anti-tank option in a platoon, which for the most part you can only have one of, and it will be a 2-man squad, conferring them the small team bonus that will come in at 80 points as regular and 104 points as veteran. And the stat line on this weapon is going to be a 24-inch range with 1 shot, and of course a 2-man team, meaning if you lose one of the squad members, you are going to confer a -1 to hit. So overall, this is going to be a 2-man squad, again, small team, so you'll be able to put them in cover, hide them inside buildings, and they are going to be pretty resilient against small arms firepower. They're going to have a 24-inch range on that weapon, which means they can cover a pretty respectable amount of the battlefield. However, they will be suffering that -1 to hit penalty at long range once you get over 12 inches, so you will likely be hitting on a 4+ to 5+ very commonly with these guys. However, I think it's safe to say that if your opponent has driven an armored vehicle within 12 inches of a Panzer Schreck, or even within 18 inches in which your squad can move 6 inches and engage, they have made a very grave mistake. And that's really where the Panzer Schreck shines. It's affordable and has the power to open an enemy vehicle up if it hits it, but it doesn't really have the mobility, accuracy, and range to go out and hunt vehicles down. Instead, it works as a very good soft anti-tank counter that operates as a sort of area denial for enemy vehicles. In many ways, a light anti-tank gun with a 48-inch range and a penetration value of just 4 could be more threatening to your opponent's armor than the Panzer Schreck just due to range alone. However, a light anti-tank gun, be it an artillery piece or mounted on a vehicle, isn't quite as nimble as a 2-man squad. You can't make as good use of cover, and it's often harder to dig in and or relocate. And sure, you can throw a Panzer Schreck squad into a transport and try and rush it towards your enemy vehicles, but it tends to not work out too well. I've definitely tried it before, and I'm sure many of other players have. At that point, you are looking at a $20 to $60 more points investment, bringing the squad into a points range that I don't really deem suitable for a 2-man infantry squad. So I do find the Panzer Schreck to be a very powerful area denial tool. And while it can be offensive and really put the heat on enemy vehicles, a good player will know to avoid them, and then bait them out of cover where they can be mopped up by other elements of their faction. So when playing with a Panzer Schreck squad, I highly recommend you to be a patient hunter. Do not let your opponent bait you into extending your force and putting your Panzer Schreck squad out there on their own. Keep them in cover and make use of that small team bonus to keep them alive. 80 points isn't exactly cheap for 2 models, and if they're caught in the open, they will go down very fast, and trust me, your enemy will make priority of them. But what about the humble Panzer Faust, the smaller, more portable, and disposable alternative platform for the shaped charge rocket? And right off the bat, you're going to take a look at the Panzer Faust stat line and see that it is somewhat of a gimped version of the Panzer Schreck. It only has a 12-inch range instead of 24-inch range. That's obviously half the range of the Panzer Schreck. And then you are going to have just 1 shot on one of these, meaning you fire it once and you can no longer use it for the rest of the match, both of which appear to be very obvious drawbacks. 12 inches, as we know, is a pretty brutally limited range. That means after 6 inches and between 12 inches, you are going to be hitting at -1, something not ideal for a 1-shot, 1-use weapon. However, when we take a further look at how the Panzer Faust is implemented in bolt action and equipped throughout your army, we're going to realize that these drawbacks don't really matter all that much, as the Panzer Faust is a 5-point upgrade that you can take in addition with your unit's standard weapon in most late war or veteran German infantry squads. For example, in your veteran Grenadier squad, which is a very popular squad to take with German players, or your Waffen-SS late war squad, or even your Fallschirmjäger late war squad, you can equip up to 4 of these Panzer Faust in your squadron, each of which come in at 5 points. So if you take a full squad of these guys, you're going to be rocking 4 Panzer Faust for just 20 points. That is quite literally a quarter of the cost of a Panzer Schreck team, and will pack the exact same amount of punch so long as you hit your targets. But what's that, you say? That's easier said than done when you have half the range and you're getting a -1 to hit beyond 6 inches. And while that is wholly true, it does very much inspire a go big or go home attitude with the Panzer Faust, one that the Panzer Schreck just doesn't have. At 12-inch range, you have an effective 18-inch range with an advance order. And with such a minimum range, you are very much encouraged to close in to that close quarters range within 6 inches, and giving yourself the +1 bonus to hit while simultaneously negating your -1 to hit for long range. So unlike the Panzer Schreck squad, you're going to find very many scenarios where a squad with Panzer Faust will greatly benefit from playing more aggressively. But here is the biggest advantage of Panzer Faust, and one that really makes them stand out above all other anti-tank weapons in the game. And that is the fact that you can fire your entire squad's payload of Panzer Faust with 1 fire order. That means if you have 4 Panzerfaust in a squad and a T-34 comes rolling into your crosshairs, you can unload 4 shaped charge with penetration value of 6 at them with 1 fire order. Compare that to a light anti-tank gun artillery piece or a Panzer IV-H heavy anti-tank gun or the Panzer Schreck itself. Those are all going to be firing just 1 shot. That's going to be 1 dice roll with 1 chance to either hit or miss your targets. And with your 4 Panzerfaust firing, even if you're suffering a -1 from long range and moving to shoots, in most scenarios you will still likely have a greater chance of hitting your target simply due to the sheer volume of dice that you are throwing. I don't want to get too deep into the math behind it, and obviously there are variables that come into play here, but for the most part, the more dice you are throwing up front, the more likely you are going to follow through with a penetrating wound. And again, while that's not always the case, that is a pretty solid ideology to live by in the world of miniature wargaming. This multiple shots coming from one squad and short-range assault ideology also makes Panzerfaust more suitable for an assault role in which they would be jumping out of something like a Hanomag transport and engaging enemy armor. On top of that, we'll consider the factor that this is not going to be a 2-man squad, and while they won't benefit from sitting in cover and layering on with that small team bonus like the Panzer Schreck squad would, a larger squad, for the most part, is going to be more durable. On top of all of that, the squad is also going to serve other battlefield purposes. A 2-man Panzer Schreck squad isn't really good for anything other than targeting tanks. However, a 10-man veteran grenadier squad, which may have a few submachine guns or assault rifles sprinkled in there, are going to be very good at doing other things aside from targeting tanks. And while the points investment may rack up on that unit, they are going to be very utilitarian on the battlefields. But what about area denial, you say? You talked about area denial earlier with the Panzer Schreck, and how that longer range on that weapon can prevent enemy vehicles from going to one point on the map. And that is very true. But let's go ahead and look at a list building scenario. You have 4 veteran German squads, be it Waffen-SS, Fallschirmjäger, or Grenadiers, and you have 80 points left over that you want to spend on a soft anti-tank counter. Now, you could do 1 regular Panzer Schreck squad to fill out that anti-tank slot for 80 points, and put them onto 1 spot in the battlefield where they're going to cover a nice 24-inch bubble. However, alternatively to that, you can take those 80 points and you can put 4 Panzerfaust upgrades into 4 different veteran infantry squads. And then, rather than having 1 24-inch bubble, you will have 4 12-inch bubbles that will cover a good section of the map. So at the end of the day, when it comes down to the question of Panzer Schreck versus Panzerfaust, I think the Panzerfaust is a very clear winner, and it deserves its place as a coveted and sought-out upgrade in the bolt-action list-building meta. And when players talk about which faction you should get into in this game, when mentioning Germans, they will often bring up the Panzerfaust. And I think that's rightfully so. It is a very powerful tool to have in your arsenal, significantly more than the Panzer Schreck in my opinion. However, all that being said, I do have several Panzer Schreck models for my Fallschirmjäger force. They're definitely one of those majorly iconic World War II weapons, perhaps even more so than the Panzerfaust in some ways, and I think if you're getting into bolt action, you're partly doing so for the historic relevance or value of the game. So I would absolutely recommend picking up some of Warlord's Panzer Schreck models as long as you're okay with working with metal. They are quite nice sculpts. And often those blister packs do come with flamethrowers also, and let's not turn this video into a Panzer Schreck vs Panzerfaust vs flamethrower, because that's opening an entire new can of worms. But I'd like to know what you guys think. Do you have experience with Panzerfaust, Panzer Schrecks, bazookas, anything of the sort? What do you think is the best anti-tank options for bolt action? Would you agree that the Panzerfaust is a sort of a secret national characteristic for the German faction in this game, right alongside the assault rifle upgrades? And let me know how you guys field them in the battlefield. But as always, if you liked the video, consider subscribing, turning on the notifications, and pressing that like button, and looking forward for more bolt action content in the future. And of course guys, as always, take care.